The torture of John Birch. Illinois has a long history of wrongful convictions, including names such as Vernill Jefferson, Omar Aguera, Kenneth Adams, and John Birch, who happens to be the biggest part of wrongful convictions. John Birch is best known for his role in the police field. Birch was a police detective and commander holding high authority in his position. John Birch became an officer at 22 from my area called the South Deering neighborhood. John Birch was an officer for almost 30 years, getting lots of awards and appreciation from the Department of Justice. But his career took an epic turn in the late 70s and early 80s. Today, I will inform you about how John Birch would fake incriminating evidence against his victims. He would torture his victims with electrocution down to suffocation, and how John Birch was convicted of all his crimes and forced to serve time and pay reparations. To begin with, John Birch would fake incriminating evidence against his victims. John Birch, with his position of authority, would use his colleagues to fake witness evidence, and use forced confessions as evidence. All evidence that seems to be used in court would be from the forced confessions, and depending on the judge, would still be used in final hearings. John Birch extracted evidence that was used to put some people behind jail bars, who will have to serve time for crimes they will later be exonerated for. In this article by Chicago Sun-Times, it states that in 1999, lawyers for several death row inmates began to call for a special review of convictions that were based on evidence and confessions extracted by Birch and his colleagues. These inmates, Aaron Patterson, Madison Hobley, Stanley Howard, Leonard Kidd, Derek King, Ronald Kitchen, Reginald Mahaffey, Jerry Mahaffey, Andrew Maxwell, and Leroy Orange became known as the Death Row 10. This piece of evidence is basically saying that after forcing false confessions, Birch would let them be used in court to try and convict people on ways such as death penalty. Furthermore, John Birch would torture his victims with methods of electrocution down to as such degrading suffocation. If caught on the street looking suspicious, John Birch would arrest victims and beat them badly. John Birch would then use his wooden box to electrocute his victims to force confessions. John Birch's methods of interrogation was degrading. He used plastic bags to suffocate them. According to an article by NBC, during his trial in 2010, many of Birch's victims lined up to describe the atrocities they had suffered during torture sessions. Their testimony included revelations that detectives had suffocated suspects with plastic bags and used cattle prods to shock their genitals. This piece of evidence was hard to read because I wasn't so familiar with the genital information. I was only in the know about the suffocation, electrocution, burning, and beating. Eventually, John Birch was convicted of all his crimes and forced to serve time and pay reparations. Birch was sentenced to about 1.5 years of jail time and served most of it. Birch was charged with obstruction of justice and perjury in civil and criminal court. The victims were rewarded $66.8 million in settlements. According to the Chicago Torture Organization, John Birch was convicted in federal court for perjury and obstruction of justice based on the fact that he lied under oath in a civil case when he denied he and others committed acts of torture. In 2011, which is not far from 2022, 20 African American men remain in prison as a result of convictions based in whole or in part upon their coerced confessions. This piece of evidence just shows how much of an impact John Birch had from his actions on others, because it's crazy to believe that some of the victims are still behind bars from these false confessions. Now that we have discussed John Birch, let's summarize. John Burge was a police officer commander convicted of torturing in Chicago, having around 111 confessed victims. John Burge's trial was the opening for many other officers to be arrested for wrongful convictions. Many of his victims still share their experiences and help bring awareness to the youth and newly hired officers. Although the crime has been punished, we still try our best to not forget, as the victims' reparation package gave them money, financial support to city colleges for them and their families, and a course in all CPS high schools. This way we will never forget their stories. This is why I thought it was important to inform you today about how John Burge faked incriminating evidence against his victims, tortured his victims with electrocution down to suffocation, and how John Burge was convicted of all his crimes and forced to serve time and pay reparations. Thank you. This is Makara Palmer.